Good morning and welcome to another edition of Connecting the Dots. My name is Emeka Opobara. I'm a partner with Next Year Power. Today we'll be discussing energy and politics, the influence of lobbying on regulation. Energy and politics have always been interlinked, with governments using policies and laws to influence the energy sector. But lobbying has also played a significant role in shaping energy policies as corporations and interest groups attempt to influence lawmakers in their favor. These policies put in place by government and the influence of lobbying significantly impact the energy sector and consequently the economy. As the world moves to a more sustainable energy future, addressing the lobbying issue is critical to ensure that the policy and decision-making processes are fair, transparent, and focused on the sector's best interests and the nation's common good. With me today, I'm excited to have Dr. Sam Amadi, former NERC chairman, and also currently an associate professor and director at the Abuja School of Social and Political Thoughts. Welcome, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
So, sir, thank you for joining us this morning. This topic is near and dear to you and also near and dear to us. So I look forward to a very interesting conversation. First of all, let's just start with a brief introduction about yourself and the work you have done in the past and what you're currently doing.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm a lawyer, first trained as a lawyer, practice as a lawyer, focusing on public interest litigation, human rights, and constitutional law, administrative law issues. And then I proceeded, of course, to go to graduate school, did policy, and set up the Center for Public Policy and Research. Later worked as special advisor to the Senate President on such a strategy. Then worked as advisor to the Foreign Affairs Minister. Became chairman and chief executive of Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. After 5 years, I went back to university as a senior lecturer, later became as a professor, head of Department of Public Law at BASE, and right now directing Abuja School and focusing more on bringing more research and intellectual resources, such as social science insights into public policy in Nigeria. So I work as a policy professional, as a law and development academic, helping to shape reform, basically, in the public sector.
Very nice. Your career seems very planned out. It seems like you've been very intentional about the roles you've taken, which is nice to see.
Thank you.
So how do you perceive the relationship between energy and politics?
Well, I think it's multidimensional. First, energy is critical to social and economic well-being of the people in very fundamental ways, whether in terms of education, in terms of health outcomes, in terms of even communal, community well-being. And so because of that, it's politics. We always, focus on energy. It's one of the critical aspects of development. And so energy has been, politics gets to shape energy policy. Politics shapes energy policy. And then energy policy shapes politics. In Nigeria, since 1999, there have been so much focus on electricity, for example. Part of the Obasanjo's campaign in 1999 was, fixing power. And in Nigeria, it has been a recurring theme of political campaigns. And politics also distorted policy in the energy sector in terms of maybe locational economics, where do put this or that energy infrastructure. And that has led to some degree of non-performance and inefficiency in the sector. Politics has also confused and blurred policy intervention. The level of clarity to solving some of these issues have been kind of affected by politics. So politics and policy have had symbiotic relationships.
That's a good way to put it, that it has a symbiotic relationship. As far as the global south is concerned, there's always seems to be a mix-up between energy and politics as far as the active implementation of policies that go in towards the energy space. Some countries have been very focused on making sure that power or electricity is not a political issue, and they've been able to right size their sector based on that focus. For instance, the Egypt example, that they've almost doubled their generation of power over the past 6 years, and also what's happening in Ghana with the fact that they now actually have more excess power than they need. How can we get to that place in this Nigerian context?
Well, it depends on what kind of politics. There are functional politics. There's also functional politics. So politics is important for development because basically politics is about collective action. How do you mobilize resources? How do you identify and move society to prioritize and act on common goods or common vision? So Egypt, for example, even though they didn't privatize, but there was a clarity as to what they wanted to do, and maybe their processes are also more streamlined, leadership more focused and less chaotic and less corrupt. And so the quality of politics and the quality of leadership. So oftentimes people, scholars or even analysts, kind of focus on leadership without looking at politics. Leadership, in the sense they look at the competences of those who are in public office. But the dialectics of politics provides incentive and provides the structure in which these competent persons play their role. So if you have a politics that is very divisive, where there's so much distributional politics, people are talking about, what project comes to our people, you won't have the level of coherence that you can get in a place like, say, Ghana or Egypt. You have to work harder to attain that coherence. So take, for example, the NIPP projects, the Nigerian Integrated Power Project. So if you're going to be distributing, if you take all the power plants to Nile Delta, you will have more efficiency in terms of location. You will have fuel source close to power plants. And therefore, the crisis we have now of looking for gas for power plants will not arise. So locational issues will be solved in one political space where there's coherence, where there's consensus, and not so in another political space where there is dissension, where there is over-leveraging, where there's so much divisiveness. So the political dysfunctionality in the Nigerian context has undermined the level of coherence and the level of effectiveness in terms of project development compared to Ghana or South Africa or Egypt. So politics is critical. It's not, no project, no power implementation platform will be non-political. The question is what kind of politics? A politics that is geared, that's functional, that is aligned and that can produce coherent result, or one that is functional and dissipates energy and resources in the conflicts around what do we do, where do we do it, and how we get it done.
Interesting. I think one of the points you mentioned that really resonates is the fact that there's functional politics and then there's also dysfunctional politics. And I think, unfortunately, here our politics has always been a bit more dysfunctional. So moving back onto the topic at hand, what are some of the examples of policies influenced by lobbying in the energy sector? And what impacts have those had on industry and also on the economy?
I think, for example, if you look at even the structure of privatization we did, the original plan, the RFP originally drawn was much more stringent, and the threshold was higher. But of course, industry players created the impression that, look, you're not going to get investors. So they basically drove down the benchmarks and changed it in a way that, for example...
Through lobbying?
Yeah, of course, through engagement with the PPE. In fact, when we wrote that, after the sales, we wrote that we reviewed their proposal, and we said not even one, maybe only one was financially, technically qualified based on so we had a meeting to reconcile. At that meeting, BPE showed, and CPC showed that they had changed, they stepped down the RFP to accommodate concerns of the investors. And so for things like, for example, you're going to have to show that if you have a partner, instead of, you have to show $100 million asset base. But you can now use, in the new order, you can now use the asset, the balance sheet of your foreign partner, that's MOU. So none of those people now have the finance to invest. You're not supposed to borrow to acquire, but it was done. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So lobbying affected the outcome because those people who wanted to buy, interestingly, have links with some of the consultants who are helping to shape the RFP. And so really the political environment for reform is critical. If you watch where reform has worked well, you see that most of the technocrats, first, they are not perverse, corruption is less. They do not have a history of people in government being co-owning assets, businesses. And people don't look at the ratio between, in Nigeria we had what we called the indigenization decree in the 1970s that required foreign investors who are coming to Nigeria to have partners in Nigeria. You can't have a company without having a Nigerian owners. So what do you think happened? Most of the people look for people in government. So that's the history. The commingling of people in government and business makes lobbying more effective and perverse. So whereas lobbying for foreign interests will be difficult with civil support, when the entities themselves are part owned by high-level policymakers. A typical case is when the Minister of Power is actually also bidding. So he wants to buy the asset. So if somebody gives a proposal and says, look, these RFP conditions are high, if nobody in that room has interest to buy, it's difficult. It will be easier to second guess and say, no, this is appropriate. But when the insiders, they say, oh, no, this is very high, let's agree with them. So lobbying worked in reducing the oversight, the quality assurance measures we have put in. So maybe at once we probably won't sell all the assets at once, but the ones you sold would have got strong investors who have the technical and financial capacity to drive up improvement.
And I know your example has been very specific to the power sector around lobbying and some of the benefits and some of the drawbacks, essentially. So from a more holistic point of view, how can the drawbacks be addressed?
I think three things. If you look at some of the laws, the laws require disclosures. Okay, so but I'm not aware whether we keep a register of disclosures. So let's look at all the sectors we appointed people, whether it's NCC, communications, whether it's in power, whether it's in tourism, where we have privatized a lot. Do we have these boards keep record of interest? So when issues come up, all the laws provide, which is typical, borrowed from what obtains abroad, that members of boards, members of the management members in decision making should indicate clearly where they have interest, whether wife, family, board members. Go and check. If you check, you'll be surprised there's no such entry anywhere in the country. So the corporate governance is important. We need to strengthen it, not just by making laws declaring that people have to declare assets, declare interests and all that, but also creating a social dynamics that allow whistleblowers, that empower vigilante groups in terms of people who will be watching the corporate scene and monitor, and then strong press, a press that is repertory, investigative journalism, not the type, maybe you see like an NPC now or Central Bank, or the guys who report the scene, they want to get contracts, they want to get jobs. So if you have maybe a public trust, like maybe government is funding a whistleblower platform so that they're not looking to be paid by the people who are supposed to oversee. So that's the kind of thing that will now, they'll find out, oh, Sam Amadi, who is going to chair a group that's going to make a decision on this policy, already has, his daughter is vice president of Google or whatever that's going to play in that market. So it will force me to make the disclosure and recuse myself from that board. Second is we don't have rigorous policy framework for decision making in terms of public institutions. So in the US, for example, you have the Administrative Procedure Act, which lays very complete and comprehensive procedure for rulemaking. This is, you have to advertise it in the Federal Register, you have to request for intervenors, written, you go through complement of public hearing. So what that does is that even if they are lobby, there will always be lobby, but there's also publicity, there's also opportunity for people to challenge the logic of lobbyists. So, let's assume we're going to do tariff now. And we're saying, because we want to improve renewable, we want to improve the sector, we need to give extra incentive to operators. So maybe some policy consultants recommend for us a 30% hike that they need to give more windfall. It will help in the long term. Maybe true, maybe not true. If you have a rigorous process for engagement and you have consumer protection groups that are independent, do their own economics. They'll come and tell you, no, this is too much, and the impact of this will not really improve much of supply to ordinary people because XYZ. So that level of contestation is one of the best protection against impact of policy of lobbyists, because you now have access to a different science, access to an alternative analysis, which the policymaker would easily see. Oftentimes, the seduction of lobbyists is not necessarily that they corrupt the pecuniary they give money to, is that they could overwhelm policymakers with what appears to be authoritative science. That's what we've not done enough. We forget that today's regulatory landscape is a lot of knowledge based. So many of the lobbyists come with very, safe or even acclaimed experts. So the experts shape the policy interventions to suit the interests of. So if you don't have local capacity to read between the lines and to see that no, this policy that has been advocated will actually favor this note and not this. We have to know that policy is a contested area, and each policy has winners and losers, and oftentimes the winners may not be the country. So you need to create a good legal framework. You need to monitor corporate complicity so that the people who are making this, who are going to sign off on policy, make the decisions themselves, are put under scrutiny so that when they are compromised or have conflict of interest, they will not participate or they will not make decisions, and those decisions are open to be interrogated and reviewed from time to time.
Interesting. Also a very insightful one. I'll get you out with two more questions. This one is around this picture you've just painted around the increased amount of lobbying and the increased amount of just how the intersection will get closer. How do we ensure or how does government ensure that the common man wins in all of this? Because if we get to a point where lobbying becomes the order of the day and we're serving self-interest, I don't think we'll be able to move forward.
Absolutely.
As a nation.
Well, I think first the government must be intentional about protecting public interests. And the question then is, how do you measure public interest? What's public interest? And I think the guide could be found in Chapter 2 of the Constitution. The Nigerians forget that the Constitution has provided it's what looked like an ideology for the state, which is social democracy, which is welfare of the people. So if government operates from that perspective, they will do two things. First, they will shore up the integrity and the independence of public institutions that are engaging with business, private sector, civil society, so regulators, transition managers, policymakers, institutions, police institutions, centers, build up their integrity and independence. Second, government has to develop key, like in the US, executive orders talk about policy review templates. So government, president issues under Clinton executive review that says, look, all policies, all regulations, all decisions on regulations must meet this cost-benefit analysis. Clinton does it, did it, where you look at, they talk about if you make one regulation, you must drop two. So there must be a guide on how to make decisions for public interest that provides procedures. So first, substantive goals. This is what each of these policies should aim at. So you don't make any policy in this sector about energy transition if you don't consider A, B, C. Consider affordability, show that you have done an affordability test analysis. You consider impact on economic growth generally in Nigeria. You consider a policy of localization of content, so these are key strategic national goals that are derived from our Chapter 2, talking about the fundamental objective of state policy. So when you articulate it, each agency must provide clear evidence that I've done this analysis and is policy positive. Again, at the national level of National Assembly, some of the laws they have made, creating these independent commissions who basically interfere in design policy, should have clawback provisions that show that before some of these regulations take effect, they have to pass some tests. You have to show that you've done public hearing, rigorous public consultation on these areas, and that the persons who are going to likely be affected would have been consulted. And you produce evidence of their own concern and how you have ultimately. So you're not kind of dictating to what they should decide, but you're laying out for them that this process of consulting those impacted by policy, showing that these policies have been thought through, and show that these policies are not being driven by external persons who probably are looking at the profitability and not the privation. So I think these are how to go about it.
Interesting. And really listening to you, it's clear that the new administration will have a lot of work to do, and given how important the power sector is. Also, one of the takeaways from this is lobbying will keep going, will also be important, but there's a number of factors that should be considered, especially the good of the common man rather than the very, very select few at the top.
Absolutely.
Thank you again for your time. This has been very insightful and very informative for us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Connecting the Dots, and thank you for listening. Have a fantastic day.